The digital countdown timer read 0500 hours, but Lieutenant Alexis Morgan had already been awake for 30 minutes. At 34, she had long outgrown the need for alarms. Her internal clock, honed through 12 years of military service, remained stubbornly precise despite her transition to the training division at Evergreen Combat Academy. The early morning darkness enveloped her small quarters as she methodically began her day. The familiar aches in her shoulder, a constant reminder of the extraction mission in Syria that had nearly ended her field career. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Alexis moved with deliberate efficiency, her fingers tracing the outline of the fading scar that ran from her collarbone to her shoulder blade. The ambush had cost her team 2 good soldiers and left her with a titanium plate where part of her shoulder blade used to be. The military doctors had warned her that her days as a field operative were over, but they had underestimated her determination and her natural talent as a marksman. By 0545, Alexis had made her way to the Academy's armory, nodding to the sleepy-eyed clerk as she signed out her personal weapon. The Remington 700 had once been standard military issue, but there was nothing standard about it now. The original black composite stock had been replaced with a custom-fitted pink laminate that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. The scope mount, trigger assembly, and barrel had all been modified to her exact specifications, and a worn pink paracord wrap adorned the grip. "Morning, old girl," Alexis whispered, running her fingertips along the custom barrel. She'd fired over 3,000 rounds through this rifle in training and combat. Each adjustment, each modification had been meticulously tested and implemented to create a weapon that felt like an extension of herself. The pink coloring had started as a joke, a defiant response to a commander who had questioned whether a woman belonged in sniper school. Over time, it had become her signature, a deliberate challenge to anyone who might underestimate her. The first of the trainees began arriving at 0630, their voices echoing across the firing range as they prepared for the day's marksmanship evaluation. This was the Academy's elite sniper course. 24 candidates selected from hundreds of applicants, all hoping to earn their place among the military's most precise shooters. Alexis positioned herself at the instructor's station, methodically arranging her equipment and reviewing the day's training plan. "Holy shit, are you seeing this?" Second Lieutenant Jackson Parker's voice carried across the range as he nudged his fellow trainee, pointing at Alexis's rifle. "I didn't realize this was a Barbie convention." His buddy, Lieutenant Ryan Miller, couldn't contain his amusement. "Seriously? That's what they're letting instruct us? My little sister has a Nerf gun that looks more intimidating." More trainees gathered around, morning air filling with barely disguised snickers. Lieutenant Emma Castro, fresh from officer candidate school with all the overconfidence that typically accompanied top graduates, stepped forward with a smirk that made Alexis's jaw tighten imperceptibly. "Ma'am, with all due respect," Castro said, her voice dripping with false politeness, "is that actually a functioning weapon, or is it just for demonstration purposes? It looks more suited for a fashion show than a battlefield." The laughter grew louder. Alexis's grip on her rifle remained steady, but something flickered behind her gray eyes. Not anger, but something deeper. Something that had been tempered through years of proving herself in a profession dominated by men who constantly questioned her capabilities. "Tell you what, Lieutenant," Castro continued, emboldened by her audience. "Why don't you let me show the class what a professional military rifle looks like?" She hefted her brand new M110 SAS, its matte black finish gleaming under the morning sun. "This is what real snipers use in the field, not something that looks like it came from a toy store." Alexis said nothing. She simply stood, walked to the equipment table, and began setting up targets at various distances. Her movements were economical, precise, like she'd performed this exact routine countless times before. "Oh, she's actually going to try to shoot with that thing," whispered Lieutenant Nate Thompson, pulling out his phone to record. "This should be good for some laughs back at the barracks." What none of them knew was that tucked away in Alexis's quarters was a locked metal box containing 5 distinguished marksman medals and a classified service record that documented confirmed kills at distances that most snipers only dreamed of achieving. They didn't know about Operation Shadowfall, when she'd eliminated 3 high-value targets in under 2 minutes, saving a diplomatic convoy from an ambush. They didn't know that the Barbie gun they were mocking had been with her through 6 deployments and had the highest confirmed kill record of any sniper weapon in the division. But Alexis wasn't thinking about records or recognition as she adjusted her scope with practiced precision. She was thinking about responsibility, about teaching these arrogant young officers what it truly meant to be a sniper before they found themselves in situations where their overconfidence could get people killed. The trainees continued their jokes, but Major Marcus Chen, the program director observing from the side of the range, had grown quiet. Something about Morgan's demeanor, the way she handled her weapon, the absolute confidence in her movements, made him step closer to observe. Alexis loaded a single round into a rifle's chamber. The sound of the bolt sliding home cut through the morning chatter like a blade, and for just a moment, the laughter died. "Target 7, she announced quietly, her voice carrying across the range despite its softness. 1,200 meters. The laughter resumed immediately. Target 7 was positioned at the farthest end of the range, barely visible even with binoculars. In the Academy's 5-year history, only 3 instructors had ever hit it consistently, and all were former Special Forces snipers with decades of experience. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 1,200 meters. Castro scoffed. "Ma'am, I can barely see that target with my scope. You sure you don't want to try something a little closer? Maybe start with the kiddie range?" Alexis settled into her shooting position, and suddenly her entire demeanor changed. The slight stiffness in her injured shoulder seemed to vanish. Her breathing became measured and controlled. Her eyes took on a laser focus that made Major Chen take an involuntary step back. For just a moment, the patient instructor disappeared and something else took her place, something that had survived ambushes, eliminated threats, and carried the weight of life-and-death decisions for over a decade. Alexis's finger found the trigger, and she began her final breathing sequence. What the trainees couldn't see was the complex calculation running through her mind: wind speed, temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, even the slight vibration in the ground from a maintenance vehicle passing 300 meters away. This was what 12 years of combat experience looked like. Not flashy equipment or bravado, but knowledge earned in places where missing meant your teammates didn't come home. The range fell silent as Alexis took her final breath and squeezed the trigger. The crack of the pink rifle echoed across Evergreen like thunder, cutting through the morning air with surgical precision. For 3 full seconds, the only sound was the distant whistle of wind through the range markers. Then Lieutenant Castro's voice broke the silence, dripping with mockery. "Well, that was impressive. Anyone see where that shot landed? Maybe we should check the neighboring state." The laughter erupted again, but this time Major Chen held up his binoculars, scanning the distant targets. His expression slowly changed from casual interest to something approaching disbelief. "Dead center," he announced quietly. The laughter died instantly. "What?" Castro grabbed her own binoculars, adjusting the focus frantically. "That's impossible. Nobody hits target 7 on the first." Her words trailed off as she stared through the lenses. Alexis calmly ejected the spent cartridge, the brass casing catching the morning sunlight as it arced through the air. She didn't bother to check her shot through the scope. She already knew where it had landed. Lieutenant Miller's hands shook slightly as he lowered his own binoculars. Holy hell! She actually did it, but the real shock was just beginning. Major Chen pulled out his tablet and began scrolling through personnel files, his brow furrowed in concentration. Alexis's name pulled up a basic instructor profile, but there was something else. Classified attachments that required higher clearance to access. "Lieutenant Morgan," Chen said carefully, "I need to make a phone call." Quote, Alexis simply nodded and began packing up her rifle. The show was over, but she could feel the weight of 24 pairs of eyes following her every movement. The casual disrespect from moments before had evaporated, replaced by something between confusion and grudging respect. "How did she do that?" whispered Lieutenant Parker to his buddy. "That shot was impossible." "Maybe she got lucky," Castro muttered, but her voice lacked conviction. Alexis overheard and paused in her packing. For the first time that morning, she spoke directly to the trainees. "Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity," she said quietly. "Some of you might want to remember that." As she walked toward the equipment building, her slight limp more pronounced under the weight of her gear bag, Alexis's mind drifted to places she tried not to visit. Syria, the ambush that had nearly ended her career, the decisions that haunted her dreams, and the lives that had depended on her never missing. Behind her, the trainees were beginning to whisper among themselves. The mood had shifted, and Alexis could feel it like a change in barometric pressure before a storm. Lieutenant Davis, a quiet, serious candidate who had remained silent during the morning's mockery, suddenly stepped forward. "Wait," he called out. "Lieutenant Morgan?" Alexis stopped but didn't turn around. "My brother served in Syria in 2019, Davis continued. "He used to tell me stories about a female sniper who saved his unit when they were ambushed outside Damascus. Said she could hit targets at distances that seemed impossible." Alexis's shoulders tensed, almost imperceptibly. "He called her Pink Death," Davis said, his voice now filled with something approaching awe. "Said she never missed. Not once in 3 years of deployment. Said she carried a custom rifle with a pink stock." The range had gone completely silent. Even the wind seemed to have stilled. "Is that you?" Davis asked simply. Alexis turned slowly, her gray eyes meeting the young officer's gaze. For a moment, something flickered across her weathered features. Pain, pride, regret, all tangled together in an expression that spoke of burdens too heavy for words. "Did your brother make it home?" she asked quietly. "Yes, ma'am. He did." Alexis nodded once. "Then that's all that matters." She continued walking, leaving behind a group of trainees who were beginning to understand that they'd been in the presence of something extraordinary. But Alexis carried a heavier burden than their newfound respect. As she locked her rifle in her personal storage locker, her hands briefly touched a small wooden box hidden behind her cleaning supplies. Inside was a collection of items she'd never shown anyone. A Purple Heart she'd received despite her protests. Commendation letters signed by generals whose names rarely appeared in public records. And a photograph of 17 soldiers who'd made it home because of her skills. But there was also a list, written in her own careful handwriting. Names of soldiers who hadn't made it home despite her best efforts. Shots she'd missed, or couldn't take, or arrived too late to matter. Alexis carried the weight of every trigger pull, every decision, every life that had hung in the balance of her marksmanship. The trainees saw one perfect shot and thought they understood who she was. They had no idea that perfection came with a price measured in sleepless nights and ghosts that whispered in the dark. Major Chen finished his phone call and approached Alexis's locker area. His expression was grave, respectful in a way it hadn't been that morning. "Lieutenant," he said quietly, "I just spoke with Colonel Harrington. She wants to see you in her office." Alexis didn't respond immediately. She'd been dreading this moment for 2 years, the moment when her past caught up with her carefully constructed quiet life. "Am I in trouble, Major?" Chen shook his head. "No, ma'am. I think they want to properly recognize what you've done. What you've achieved." Alexis's laugh was bitter and brief. "Recognition is for people who want to be remembered, Major. I just want to be left alone to do my job." But as she walked toward the administration building, Alexis knew her peaceful days of anonymity were coming to an end. The shot that was meant to quiet the mockery had instead awakened something she'd spent years trying to bury. Sometimes the hardest part of being exceptional isn't the exceptional acts themselves. It's living with the aftermath, carrying the weight of other people's expectations, and trying to find peace in a world that wants to turn your worst moments into your greatest achievements. Alexis had learned long ago that the most dangerous enemies weren't the ones shooting at you from a distance. They were the ones inside your own head, whispering that you could have done more, been faster, been better. As she approached Colonel Harrington's office, Alexis straightened her shoulders and prepared to face whatever came next, but she couldn't shake the feeling that her carefully constructed world was about to change forever. Colonel Rebecca Harrington's office felt like a tribunal. Alexis sat rigidly in the chair across from her desk, hands folded in her lap, while Harrington read through a thick file marked with security classifications she recognized but had hoped never to see again. "Lieutenant Alexis Morgan," Harrington said slowly, her voice carrying the weight of authority. Or should I say, Operator Phantom. Alexis's jaw tightened. That call sign belonged to a different life, a different version of herself that she had buried along with too many memories. "I go by Lieutenant Morgan now, ma'am." Harrington nodded, her blue eyes studying Alexis's face. "Says here you've been flying under the radar for 2 years. Requested transfer to training duty. Took a reduction in responsibilities. Your commanding officers in Syria recommended you for the Silver Star 3 times. Which I declined 3 times, ma'am. Yes, I see that. Harrington closed the file and leaned back in her chair. Mind telling me why one of our most decorated marksmen is content to teach basic sniper skills to recruits who don't even recognize what they're looking at? Alexis's silence stretched long enough to become uncomfortable. Outside the window, she could see the firing range where her single shot had shattered her carefully maintained anonymity. She'd been a fool to think she could hide forever. With respect, ma'am, my reasons are my own. Harrington's expression hardened. Not anymore, they're not. Word is already spreading about what happened at the range this morning. Major Chen made some calls, and now I've got Joint Special Operations Command asking questions about why one of our most effective operators has been wasted on entry-level instruction. Alexis felt something cold settle in her stomach. Ma'am, I specifically requested. I know what you requested, Harrington cut her off. But here's the thing, Lieutenant. The military doesn't get to waste assets like you. Not in today's climate. We're shipping you back to active operations. Effective immediately. The words hit Alexis like a physical blow. She'd spent 2 years building a life away from the scope, away from the calculations that meant life or death, away from the weight of taking lives to save lives. The thought of returning to that world made her hand shake for the first time in years. Ma'am, I'm not fit for active duty. The ambush that injured your shoulder and grounded you for 6 months? Harrington's voice was matter-of-fact, brutal in its efficiency. Your physical evaluation shows you've made a full recovery. Your shooting this morning proves your skills are intact. You're being reassigned to Joint Special Operations Task Force within the week. Alexis stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. No, ma'am. I won't do it. Harrington's eyebrows shot up. Excuse me? I said no, I'm refusing the assignment. The office fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Harrington's face flushed slightly, and when she spoke, her voice was dangerously quiet. Lieutenant, I don't think you understand. This isn't a request. This is a direct order from JSOC. You don't get to refuse. Alexis straightened to her full height, her gray eyes meeting Harrington's glare without flinching. Then I'm requesting immediate discharge from service. Denied. On what grounds? Harrington smiled, but there was no warmth in it. On the grounds that you're too valuable to lose. Your contract has been extended under the Special Operations Personnel Retention Program. Congratulations, Lieutenant. You're stuck with us for another 4 years. Alexis felt the walls closing in around her. She'd known this moment would come eventually, but she'd hoped for more time. Time to heal. Time to forget. Time to become someone other than the weapon the military had shaped her into. Ma'am, you can't force me to kill people. I'm not forcing you to do anything, Lieutenant. I'm simply ensuring that your skills are utilized where they're needed most. What you do with those skills is between you and your conscience. Alexis's hands clenched into fists at her sides. For a moment, Harrington saw something flicker across her features, something that reminded her why snipers were often considered the most dangerous soldiers in any army. You have no idea what you're asking me to do, Alexis said quietly. I know exactly what I'm asking. I'm asking you to serve your country, just like thousands of other soldiers do every day. Those soldiers don't carry what I carry. Harrington leaned forward, her voice taking on a patronizing tone that made Alexis's skin crawl. Lieutenant, I've read your file. I know about the PTSD evaluation, the nightmares, the survivor's guilt. But here's the reality. You're a soldier first, and your personal issues come second to the needs of national security. Alexis felt something break inside her chest. 2 years of careful emotional control. 2 years of building walls between herself and the part of her that lived in crosshairs and calculated kill shots, suddenly crumbled. Personal issues? Her voice was barely above a whisper, but Harrington suddenly looked uncomfortable. Ma'am, do you know how many people I've killed? Lieutenant, I don't think. 38 confirmed kills. 38 human beings who stopped breathing because I was good at my job. Do you know what that does to a person? Do you know what it's like to see their faces every time you close your eyes? Harrington's confident expression was beginning to crack. Lieutenant Morgan, you need to calm down. And do you know what's worse than the ones I killed? The ones I couldn't save. The ones who died because I wasn't fast enough, wasn't good enough, wasn't in the right position at the right time. Alexis's voice was rising now, years of suppressed emotion pouring out like a broken dam. My spotter, Martinez, died because I couldn't get to him in time after the ambush. Bled out in my arms while I tried to stop the bleeding with my bare hands. That's enough, Lieutenant. No, ma'am, it's not enough. You want to talk about utilizing my skills? My skills are built on a foundation of dead bodies and broken promises. Every shot I take carries the weight of every shot I've missed. Every life I save reminds me of the lives I couldn't save. Alexis was breathing hard now, her carefully maintained composure completely shattered. Harrington reached for her phone, probably to call security, but Alexis's next words stopped her cold. You want to force me back into the field? Fine. But understand this. I won't be the same operator I was before. The woman who could take those shots without hesitation died in that ambush in Syria. What you're getting is someone who sees ghosts in every scope and carries the weight of 38 souls on her conscience. The office fell silent. Harrington's hand hovered over her phone, but something in Alexis's expression made her hesitate. You're right about one thing, ma'am, Alexis continued, her voice dropping back to its normal quiet tone. I am too valuable to waste. But not because of my shooting skills. I'm valuable because I know the cost of those skills. I know what it means to be turned into a weapon and then expected to live with the consequences. Alexis turned toward the door, then paused. I'll report for reassignment as ordered, ma'am. But I want you to remember this conversation when the reports start coming in about my performance. You're not getting Operator Phantom back. You're getting someone who learned the hard way that there are some things more important than following orders. As Alexis left Harrington's office, she carried with her the bitter taste of defeat, but also something else, a growing determination that if she was going to be forced back into the world she'd tried to escape, she wouldn't go quietly. Sometimes the most dangerous person in any conflict isn't the one with the best skills or the newest equipment. It's the one who has nothing left to lose. Alexis spent the next 3 days in a strange kind of limbo. Officially, she was still an instructor at Evergreen Combat Academy, but word of her impending reassignment had spread through the base like wildfire. The trainees who had mocked her pink rifle now watched her with a mixture of awe and uncertainty, while the other instructors gave her a wide berth, unsure how to treat someone who'd gone from colleague to legend overnight. But Alexis wasn't focused on the awkwardness around her. She was doing what snipers do best, observing, calculating, and preparing for the next shot. She spent her evenings in the base's Legal Resource Center, a cramped room filled with military manuals and outdated computer terminals. Most soldiers avoided the place, preferring to spend their free time at the recreation center or in town, but Alexis had always found solace in information, and right now, information was her best weapon. She started with military regulations, particularly those governing personnel assignments and discharge procedures. What she found made her jaw clench with frustration. Harrington had been right about the Special Operations Personnel Retention Program. It was a little-known provision that allowed the military to extend contracts for personnel deemed critical to national security. But as Alexis dug deeper, she discovered something interesting. The program required specific documentation and approval processes that had to be followed to the letter. Any deviation from protocol could invalidate the extension. Burning the midnight oil again, Lieutenant? Alexis looked up to find Major Chen standing in the doorway, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. She'd been so absorbed in her research that she hadn't heard him approach. Just some light reading, Major. Chen set 1 cup next to her and settled into the chair across from her. Mind if I ask what you're looking for? Alexis studied his face for a moment. Chen had been decent to her over the past 2 years, neither particularly friendly nor hostile, but something in his expression suggested he had more on his mind than casual conversation. Legal precedents, she said carefully. Chen nodded slowly. Thought so. Look, Lieutenant, I know what Harrington is trying to do to you, and I don't like it. Alexis's eyebrows rose slightly. Oh? I've been in the service for 17 years. I've seen good soldiers burned out by commanders who see them as nothing but tools. What happened to you in Syria? What you went through? No one should be forced back into that situation against their will. Alexis felt a flicker of hope, but kept her expression neutral. Are you speaking officially, Major? Hell no. Officially, I'm just here to make sure one of my instructors isn't planning to go AWOL. Chen leaned forward, lowering his voice. But unofficially, I might have some information that could help your situation. Alexis closed the regulation manual she'd been reading. I'm listening. Harrington's been under pressure from above to show results. Her promotion to full colonel got delayed last year because of some issues with training efficiency ratings. Word is she's looking for high-profile wins to boost her record. And I'm her ticket to advancement. Exactly. But here's the thing. Harrington cut some corners when she processed your retention paperwork. She was so eager to get approval that she skipped a few steps. Alexis felt her pulse quicken. What kind of steps? Chen glanced around the empty resource center, then pulled a folder from inside his jacket. The kind that require a psychological evaluation before reassignment to active duty, especially for personnel who've been in non-combat roles for extended periods. Alexis opened the folder and scanned its contents. Her heart began to race as she read the regulation Chen had highlighted. Any service member reassigned to active combat duty following a period of non-combat service exceeding 18 months must undergo comprehensive psychological evaluation by qualified military mental health personnel, she read aloud. Harrington ordered your reassignment without the evaluation, Chen said quietly. Technically, that makes the whole thing invalid. Alexis looked up from the papers. Why are you helping me? Chen was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup. I had a younger sister, Army Ranger deployed to Afghanistan in 2017. She was a good kid. Wanted to serve her country, do the right thing. But she saw too much over there, went through too much. When she came home, she wasn't the same. What happened to her? She tried to get help. Tried to talk to someone about what she was going through, but her commanding officer said the Rangers didn't need weak soldiers, that she just needed to tough it out. Forced her back into deployment rotation. Chen's voice grew heavy. She killed herself 3 weeks before she was supposed to come home for good. Left a note saying she couldn't carry the weight anymore. Alexis felt a familiar ache in her chest. She'd known too many soldiers who'd lost their battles with invisible wounds. I'm sorry, Major. The point is, I won't stand by and watch another good soldier get destroyed by commanders who see people as nothing but numbers on a report. Chen met her eyes. You've got grounds for appeal, Lieutenant. The question is whether you're willing to fight. Alexis stared at the regulation documents, her mind racing through possibilities. Fighting Harrington would mean going up against the system that had shaped her entire adult life. It would mean exposing herself to scrutiny, reliving trauma she'd spent years trying to bury. But it would also mean taking control of her own life for the first time in 12 years. What would I need to do? Chen smiled grimly. File a formal complaint with the Inspector General's office, cite the regulation violations, request a mandatory psychological evaluation, and demand a review of your reassignment. And if Harrington retaliates? That's where it gets interesting. Any attempt to punish you for filing a legitimate complaint would be grounds for additional charges against her. Alexis felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not the desperate kind that came from wishing things were different, but the solid, tactical kind that came from having a plan. There's one more thing, Chen said, pulling out his phone. That shot you made at the range, I recorded it. Video documentation of your current skill level might be useful if anyone questions your fitness for duty. Alexis watched the video on Chen's phone. Herself, calm and controlled, taking an impossible shot and making it look routine. But what struck her wasn't her own performance. It was the faces of the young trainees in the background, their expressions changing from mockery to awe in the space of a heartbeat. They look at you like you're some kind of superhero, Chen observed. I'm not. Maybe not, but you're something those kids needed to see. Proof that skill and experience matter more than fancy equipment and loud voices. Alexis handed the phone back, but her mind was still processing what she'd seen. Those trainees would remember that moment for the rest of their careers. Not just the shot itself, but the lesson that came with it. That quiet competence often trumped flashy displays. Major, if I do this, if I fight back, I need to know you'll back me up. Chen nodded without hesitation. All the way, Lieutenant. Some things are worth fighting for. As Alexis walked back to her quarters that night, she carried with her more than just regulation documents and legal precedents. She carried the knowledge that she wasn't as alone as she'd thought, and that sometimes the most important battles were the ones fought not with rifles and scopes, but with paperwork and persistence. Harrington thought she held all the cards, but Alexis had learned something valuable during her years in the field. The most dangerous enemy was often the one who appeared to be cornered. Tomorrow, she would begin the fight for her freedom, not with the skills that had made her a legend, but with the one weapon Harrington hadn't counted on, her refusal to go quietly. Alexis stood outside the Inspector General's office at 0800 hours sharp, a thick manila folder clutched in her hands. Inside were copies of regulation violations, timeline discrepancies, and a formal complaint that had taken her 3 sleepless nights to perfect. She'd written it like a sniper plans a shot, methodically, precisely, with no room for error. The IG's office was located in the base's administrative complex, a sterile building that smelled of floor wax and bureaucracy. Alexis had avoided this place for 2 years, preferring the honest smell of gun oil and fresh air at the training ranges. But today, this was her battlefield. Lieutenant Morgan, Commander Jacobs will see you now. Commander Sarah Jacobs was exactly what Alexis had expected. Crisp uniform, sharp eyes, and an expression that suggested she'd heard every sob story and excuse in the military handbook. Her office was spartanly decorated, with only a few commendations on the wall and a photo of her with various high-ranking officials. "Have a seat, Lieutenant. I understand you have a complaint to file." Alexis placed her folder on Jacobs's desk and sat at attention. "Yes, ma'am. I'm filing a formal complaint regarding procedural violations in my recent reassignment orders." Jacobs opened the folder and began reading. Her expression neutral. Alexis had organized everything chronologically, with tabs marking each regulation violation and supporting documentation. She'd learned long ago that presentation mattered as much as content when dealing with military bureaucracy. "This is quite thorough," Jacobs said after several minutes. "You're alleging that Colonel Harrington violated military regulations regarding psychological evaluations for combat reassignment." "Yes, ma'am. Specifically Arkansas 40-501, Section 7-15, which requires comprehensive mental health screening for any service member returning to active combat duty after 18 months in non-combat roles." Jacobs made notes as Alexis spoke. "And you're requesting this evaluation be completed before any reassignment takes effect?" "Correct, ma'am. I'm also requesting a review of the Special Operations Personnel Retention Program application in my case, as it appears to have been expedited without proper documentation." What Alexis didn't say was that she'd spent the previous evening on a secure military database, cross-referencing Harrington's previous personnel decisions. What she'd found was a pattern of cutting corners and bypassing regulations when it served her purposes. She'd documented everything but was holding it in reserve. Jacobs leaned back in her chair. "Lieutenant, I have to ask, are you psychologically fit for duty? Because from where I sit, this looks like someone trying to avoid a legitimate assignment." Alexis had expected this question. "Ma'am, that's exactly what the mandatory evaluation is designed to determine. I'm not claiming to be unfit. I'm claiming that proper procedures weren't followed to make that determination." "Fair enough." Jacobs closed the folder. "I'll need to investigate these allegations. In the meantime, your reassignment is suspended pending review." Alexis felt a surge of relief, but kept her expression neutral. "Thank you, ma'am." "Don't thank me yet, Lieutenant. If this investigation finds that your complaints are frivolous or made in bad faith, you could be facing charges for insubordination and making false statements." "I understand, ma'am." As Alexis left Jacobs's office, she felt lighter than she had in weeks. The first shot had been fired, and it had hit its target. But she knew Harrington wouldn't take this lying down. She was right. By 1,400 hours, Alexis had been summoned back to Harrington's office. This time, she wasn't alone. A stern-faced Captain Alexis didn't recognize sat in the corner, taking notes. "Lieutenant Morgan." Harrington's voice was ice-cold. "I understand you've been making some serious allegations about my command decisions." "Ma'am, I filed a complaint about procedural violations." "The allegations are documented in the official complaint." Harrington's face was flushed. You want to play games with regulations, Lieutenant? Fine. Effective immediately, you're confined to base pending investigation. No leave, no off-base privileges, no contact with outside parties except through official channels. Alexis had expected retaliation, but the severity caught her off guard. Ma'am, on what grounds? Security risk. We can't have someone with your clearance level running around making accusations while under investigation. The captain in the corner spoke up. Ma'am, is that really necessary? Lieutenant Morgan hasn't been charged with anything. Harrington shot him a withering look. Captain Ross, I don't recall asking for your opinion. Alexis realized she was witnessing something important. Not everyone in Harrington's chain of command was comfortable with her tactics. She filed that information away for later use. Ma'am, Alexis said carefully, I believe confining me to base without charges could be seen as retaliation for filing a legitimate complaint. Harrington's smile was predatory. Prove it, Lieutenant. As Alexis left Harrington's office, she understood that the real battle was just beginning. Harrington was gambling that she could make Alexis's life miserable enough to force her to withdraw her complaint. What she didn't understand was that Alexis had survived far worse than administrative harassment. That evening, Alexis found Major Chen waiting by her quarters. I heard about Harrington's retaliation, he said quietly. Are you okay? I'm confined to base, but otherwise fine. Alexis glanced around to make sure they weren't being overheard. How did word get out so fast? Base gossip travels faster than radio waves, but there's something else you should know. You're not as alone as Harrington thinks. Chen handed her a piece of paper with several names written on it. These are instructors and officers who've had their own run-ins with Harrington's methods. They're willing to provide statements if needed. Alexis looked at the list and felt a surge of hope. Among the names were people she respected, including Captain Lieutenant Nguyen, a decorated combat veteran who'd been passed over for promotion twice under Harrington's command. Why are they willing to help? Because Harrington's been playing fast and loose with regulations for months, and people are tired of it. Your complaint might be the catalyst that brings her whole house of cards down. That night, Alexis sat in her small quarters, planning her next moves. Harrington had made a critical error by retaliating so quickly and obviously. She'd given Alexis more ammunition for her case, and possibly shown her hand to people who might have remained neutral. Alexis pulled out a notepad and began writing, not a military report this time, but something more personal. A letter to the young trainees she'd been teaching. She wanted them to understand that standing up to authority wasn't about being rebellious or difficult. It was about having the courage to do what was right, even when it was hard. She thought about Lieutenant Castro and the other officers who'd mocked her pink rifle, and how their expressions had changed after that single shot. They'd learned that day that appearances could be deceiving, that skill and experience mattered more than flash and polish. Now she was teaching them another lesson, that sometimes the most important battles weren't fought on distant battlefields, but right here at home, against systems and people who abused their power. Alexis finished her letter and sealed it in an envelope. Tomorrow she would ask Chen to deliver it to her former students. Tonight she would prepare for the fight of her life. As she lay in her narrow bunk, Alexis realized something that surprised her. For the first time in 2 years, she felt like herself again. Not the broken woman who'd crawled away from that ambush in Syria, not the instructor hiding from her past, but the soldier who'd learned to take impossible shots under impossible conditions. Harrington had made one crucial mistake. She'd assumed that forcing Alexis into a corner would make her surrender. She'd forgotten that cornered snipers were the most dangerous kind. 3 days into her base confinement, Alexis received an unexpected visitor. Captain Lieutenant Nguyen knocked on her door at 0630, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the grim expression of a woman with bad news. "Morning, Lieutenant. Mind if I come in?" Alexis's quarters were barely large enough for one person, let alone 2, but Nguyen squeezed inside and closed the door behind her. "I've got news from the IG investigation," she said without preamble. "Jacobs has been thorough, and what she's finding isn't pretty." Alexis accepted the coffee gratefully. She'd been living on base food and vending machine snacks since Harrington had restricted her movements. How bad is it for Harrington? Career-ending bad. Jacobs found at least 8 other cases where she bypassed regulations for personnel decisions. Turns out your situation wasn't an isolated incident. Alexis felt a grim satisfaction, but Nguyen's expression suggested there was more to the story. What's the catch? Harrington knows she's finished. Jacobs' recommendation is going to include a formal investigation by the Criminal Investigation Division. We're talking court-martial territory. Alexis's coffee suddenly tasted bitter. And desperate people do desperate things. Word is Harrington's planning to escalate before Jacobs can finish her report. Nguyen leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. She's called in favors from her old unit. There's going to be an incident during your psychological evaluation tomorrow. Something that will make you look unstable, violent, unfit for duty. Alexis's blood ran cold. She'd seen this kind of setup before, manufactured situations designed to justify predetermined conclusions. What kind of incident? The kind where you allegedly assault a medical officer during evaluation, the kind where you're sedated for your own safety and wake up with a medical discharge for psychological unfitness. Alexis stared into her coffee cup, her mind racing through possibilities. Harrington was gambling everything on one last play, betting that she could destroy Alexis's credibility before she could destroy her career. How do you know this? Nguyen smiled grimly. Because the medical officer she approached used to serve under me in Iraq. Captain Michael Reeves. He came to me because he didn't like what Harrington was asking him to do. Alexis looked up sharply. He's willing to help? More than willing. He's furious. Reeves is one of the most ethical officers I know, and Harrington essentially asked him to falsify medical records. He's prepared to testify about her approach if needed. Alexis felt pieces clicking into place in her mind, like adjusting a scope until the target came into perfect focus. What does he need from me? Your cooperation in documenting the setup. Reeves is going to wear a recording device during your evaluation tomorrow. If Harrington or anyone else tries to manufacture an incident, we'll have proof. Alexis nodded slowly. This was risky. If they were caught recording without authorization, they could all face charges. But it was also the kind of calculated risk that had kept her alive in Syria. There's something else, Nguyen continued. Jacobs' investigation turned up some interesting financial records. Apparently, Harrington's been using the Special Operations Personnel Retention Program to get bonuses for retaining critical personnel. Each time she successfully keeps someone from leaving, she gets a performance bonus. So this was never about my skills or national security. It was about her bank account and her promotion prospects. You were just another line item on her efficiency report. Alexis felt anger burning in her chest, but it was the cold, controlled anger of a professional. Harrington had treated her like a commodity, an asset to be manipulated for her personal gain. She'd weaponized Alexis's trauma and her service record to advance her own career. What's the timeline? Reeves will conduct your evaluation at 1,400 hours tomorrow. Jacobs is scheduled to submit her preliminary findings to Division Command at 1,600 hours. We need to time this perfectly. Alexis stood up and walked to her small window, looking out at the training ranges where this whole situation had started. In the distance, she could see new trainees practicing their shooting stances, probably with the same arrogance and ignorance she'd once faced. Captain Nguyen, I need you to do something for me. Name it. Contact Lieutenant Castro, the one who mocked my rifle. Tell her I want to see her tonight. Nguyen looked puzzled. May I ask why? Alexis turned from the window, and Nguyen saw something in her expression that reminded her why she'd been called Pink Death in the field. Because tomorrow, when this is all over, I want those trainees to understand what really happened here. I want them to learn that the real enemy isn't always the one shooting at you from a distance. Sometimes it's the one sitting behind a desk, treating soldiers like pieces on a chessboard. That evening, Lieutenant Castro arrived at Alexis's quarters looking nervous and confused. Alexis gestured for her to sit on her single chair while she remained standing. Your file says you graduated top of your class at Officer Candidate School, Alexis began. Did they teach you about the hardest part of being an officer? Castro shook her head. It's not the shooting or the danger or even the fear. It's learning to tell the difference between orders worth following and orders that will destroy you and your team. Alexis paused. Your instructors probably didn't teach you that lesson. Now I'm going to. Alexis spent the next hour explaining everything. Harrington's violations, the setup being planned for her evaluation, and the broader pattern of abuse that had been happening under their noses. "Why are you telling me this?" Castro asked when she finished. "Because you and the other trainees need to understand that being a good officer doesn't mean blindly following orders. It means having the courage to stand up when something's wrong, even when it's dangerous to do so." Castro was quiet for a long moment. "What happens to you tomorrow?" Alexis smiled, and for the first time in days it was genuine. "Tomorrow I remind Rebecca Harrington that some people can't be intimidated, bought, or broken, and I teach her the same lesson I taught all of you at the firing range. Which is, never underestimate the quiet ones, because sometimes they're quiet for a reason." As Castro left her quarters, Alexis felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced since this whole ordeal began. Tomorrow would bring the final confrontation, but she was ready. She'd spent 12 years learning to take impossible shots under impossible conditions. Tomorrow, she would take the most important shot of her life, not through a rifle scope, but through the careful application of truth, evidence, and the kind of moral courage that couldn't be faked or manufactured. Harrington thought she was setting a trap for Alexis. She had no idea that she'd walked into one herself. Alexis arrived at the medical facility at 1,350 hours, 10 minutes early, as was her habit. The building smelled of antiseptic and floor wax, sterile and impersonal. Captain Michael Reeves met her in the waiting area, clipboard in hand and a small recording device discreetly clipped to his collar beneath his white coat. "Lieutenant Morgan, I'm Captain Reeves. Thank you for being punctual." Alexis nodded, noting the slight tension in Reeves's voice. They were both walking into dangerous territory, but there was no turning back now. The evaluation room was small and windowless, containing only a desk, 2 chairs, and a medical examination table. Reeves gestured for Alexis to sit while he reviewed his notes. "This is a standard psychological evaluation for combat readiness," Reeves said, his voice carrying clearly in the small room. "I'll be asking you some questions about your mental state, your experiences, and your feelings about returning to active duty." Alexis settled into her chair, hyper-aware of every sound and movement. Somewhere in this building, she knew Harrington was waiting for her moment to spring whatever trap she'd planned. "Let's start with your time in Syria," Reeves continued. "Can you tell me about your last combat deployment?" Alexis had rehearsed this part. Her answers needed to be honest but controlled, giving Reeves material to work with while avoiding anything that could be twisted against her. "I served as a designated marksman with Joint Special Operations Task Force from 2018 to 2021. My primary role was long-range reconnaissance and target elimination." "And how did that deployment end?" "Ambush during extraction. I sustained injuries that required extended medical leave." Reeves made notes, nodding professionally. Alexis could see him checking the time discreetly. They were 15 minutes into the evaluation, and nothing unusual had happened yet. Then the door opened. Colonel Harrington entered without knocking, accompanied by 2 military police officers Alexis didn't recognize. Her expression was grim, official, the face of a woman doing her duty. "Captain Reeves, I need to interrupt this evaluation." Reeves looked up, his expression professionally neutral despite the recording device capturing every word. "Ma'am, we're in the middle of a psychological assessment. Is this urgent?" "I'm afraid it is. We've received intelligence suggesting that Lieutenant Morgan may be experiencing a psychological episode. For everyone's safety, I'm ordering an immediate medical hold." Alexis felt her pulse spike but kept her voice steady. "Ma'am, on what grounds?" Harrington pulled out a folder and handed it to Reeves. Reports from multiple sources indicating erratic behavior, paranoid ideation, and potential for violence. "I'm sorry, Lieutenant, but you're going to need to be sedated and transferred to the psychiatric ward for observation." This was it, the manufactured crisis Nguyen had warned her about. Alexis could see one of the MPs moving to block the door while the other approached her chair. "Colonel," Reeves said carefully, "I'm not seeing any evidence of psychological distress in my evaluation so far. Perhaps we should complete the assessment before—" "Captain, that's an order." Harrington cut him off. "Lieutenant Morgan is to be restrained and sedated immediately." Alexis stood slowly, her hands visible and empty. Every instinct screamed at her to fight, to resist, to show them exactly what a trained killer looked like when cornered. But that was exactly what Harrington wanted. Instead, she did something unexpected. She smiled. "Rebecca Harrington," Alexis said quietly, "before your men lay hands on me, I think there's something you should know." Harrington's confident expression flickered slightly. "Lieutenant, you're in no position to—" "I'm in no position to what? To defend myself against false charges? To expose your pattern of regulatory violations? To reveal your financial motivation for this entire situation?" The room went dead silent. Harrington's face began to flush red. "You have no idea what you're talking about." Alexis's smile widened. "Don't I? Tell me, Colonel, how much bonus money have you received for personnel retention over the past 2 years? And how many of those retentions involved bypassing mandatory procedures?" Harrington's hand moved toward her sidearm, and Alexis saw everything she needed to see in that gesture. Harrington was trapped, desperate, and about to make the kind of mistake that would end her career permanently. "That's enough!" Quote, Harrington shouted. "Lieutenant Morgan is clearly experiencing a psychotic break. Restrain her immediately!" But neither MP moved. They were looking between Harrington and Alexis with growing confusion, professional soldiers, smart enough to recognize that something wasn't right about this situation. Captain Reeves stood up, his voice steady and authoritative. "Colonel Harrington, I'm the medical officer in charge of this evaluation, and I'm not seeing any evidence of psychological distress requiring immediate intervention. Captain, I'm giving you a direct order. Ma'am, with respect, you don't have medical authority in this facility, and I'm documenting everything for my report." Harrington's face went white as she realized what Reeves was telling her. Every word, every illegal order, every attempt at manipulation was being recorded and would become part of the official record. Alexis stepped forward, her voice calm and conversational. "Colonel, I think you should know that Commander Jacobs is expecting Captain Reeves's evaluation report in approximately 30 minutes. I wonder what she'll think when she reads about your attempt to forcibly sedate a service member during a legitimate psychological assessment." Harrington's world was collapsing around her, and Alexis could see her calculating her options. All of them led to the same place: the end of her career and possible criminal charges. "You planned this," she whispered. "No, ma'am, you planned this. I just refuse to cooperate with your plan." The door opened again, and Commander Jacobs entered with 2 officers from the Inspector General's office. Her expression was glacial as she surveyed the scene. "Colonel Harrington, you're relieved of command, effective immediately. You'll be escorted to your quarters to await formal charges." Harrington looked around the room like a trapped animal, seeing her carefully constructed world falling apart. "This is impossible. She's just one lieutenant. How could one person with the courage to stand up to corruption," Jacobs cut her off, "and the intelligence to document everything properly?" As the MPs escorted Harrington from the room, Alexis felt something she hadn't experienced in 2 years: complete, absolute victory. Not the kind that came from eliminating a target at long range, but the kind that came from standing up for what was right and seeing justice prevail. Captain Reeves switched off his recording device and smiled. "Well, Lieutenant, I think we can conclude this evaluation. In my professional opinion, you're psychologically fit for duty, whatever duty you choose to accept." Alexis nodded, feeling lighter than she had in years. "Thank you, Captain." "For everything." Jacobs approached Alexis, her expression respectful. "Lieutenant Morgan, on behalf of the United States military, I apologize for what you've endured. Colonel Harrington's actions were inexcusable, and justice will be served. What happens now? Now you get to decide your own future. Harrington's retention order has been voided, along with all related documentation. You're free to choose your assignment, request discharge, or continue in your current role, whatever you prefer." Alexis looked around the room where she had just fought and won the most important battle of her military career. No rifle, no scope, no impossible distance shot, just courage, preparation, and the refusal to back down when cornered. "I'd like to return to my students, ma'am. I think they have more to learn." 6 months later, Alexis stood at the same firing range where everything had started, watching a new group of trainees practice their shooting stances. But this time, something was different. Instead of mockery and dismissive laughter, she heard focused concentration and respectful questions. Word of what had happened with Harrington had spread throughout the military community, but not in the way Alexis had expected. The story wasn't about her legendary shooting skills or her classified missions in Syria. Instead, it had become something more important, a lesson about moral courage and the importance of standing up to abusive power. Lieutenant Morgan? Lieutenant Emma Castro approached her instructor's station. She was one of the trainees who had laughed at Alexis's pink rifle 6 months ago, but her attitude had completely transformed. "Could you help me with my breathing technique? I'm still struggling with the longer shots." Alexis smiled and moved to observe Castro's stance. "Show me your natural breathing pattern first." As Castro settled into position, Alexis noticed Lieutenant Davis watching from the next lane. He'd become something of an unofficial historian among the trainees, sharing the story of Alexis's stand against Harrington with each new class that arrived at Evergreen. "Remember," Alexis called out to the entire group, "your weapon is just a tool. Your character is what determines whether you'll use that tool responsibly." The trainees nodded seriously. These weren't the cocky, dismissive officers who had mocked her months ago. These were young people who understood that real strength came from within, not from equipment or rank. Alexis's personal life had changed too. The base confinement and stress of fighting Harrington had forced her to confront the trauma she'd been carrying for years. She'd finally accepted the psychological counseling she'd refused after the ambush in Syria, working with a therapist who specialized in combat-related PTSD. The nightmares hadn't disappeared entirely, but they'd become manageable. More importantly, Alexis had learned to separate her identity from her past missions. She was more than the sum of her confirmed kills, more than the trauma she'd endured, more than the legend others had built around her. "Lieutenant?" Castro's voice brought Alexis back to the present. "I hit the target, but not center mass. What am I doing wrong?" Alexis moved behind Castro and observed her shooting position. "Your fundamentals are solid, but you're overthinking the shot. Sometimes the most accurate shooting comes from trusting your training and letting muscle memory take over." As Castro adjusted her stance and fired again, this time hitting much closer to center, Alexis reflected on how much her teaching had evolved. She still taught marksmanship, but now she emphasized something more important, the responsibility that came with deadly skills. Major Chen approached the instructor's station, carrying a manila folder. He'd been promoted to lieutenant colonel after his role in exposing Harrington's corruption, but he'd chosen to remain at Evergreen rather than accept a transfer to a more prestigious posting. "Alexis, I've got news," he said quietly. "Harrington's court-martial concluded yesterday." Alexis set down the rifle she'd been cleaning. "And?" "Guilty on all counts. Fraud, abuse of authority, violation of military regulations. She's been stripped of rank and dishonorably discharged. She'll also face civilian charges for the financial irregularities." Alexis nodded, feeling a sense of closure she hadn't expected. Harrington's downfall didn't erase the trauma she'd caused, but it sent a clear message that abuse of power wouldn't be tolerated. "There's something else," Chen continued. "The Army wants to offer you a commendation for your role in exposing the corruption. They're also offering you any assignment you want, special operations, training command, even a position at the Pentagon if you're interested." Alexis looked out at her students, watching them practice the fundamentals she'd taught them. Some would go on to become snipers, others would serve in different capacities, but all of them would carry forward the lessons they'd learned about integrity and moral courage. "I'm exactly where I want to be, Colonel." Chen smiled. "I figured you'd say that. But there is one more thing. They want to know if you'd be interested in developing a new curriculum for ethics training. Your experience with Harrington has highlighted some gaps in how we prepare officers for leadership roles." Alexis considered the offer. Teaching marksmanship was important, but teaching future leaders how to recognize and resist corruption could save countless careers and lives. "I'd like to think about it. Take all the time you need." As Chen left, Alexis returned her attention to her students. They were wrapping up the day's exercises, cleaning their weapons with the careful attention to detail she'd drilled into them. "Before you leave," Alexis called out, "I want to share something with you." The trainees gathered around her instructor's station, their faces attentive and respectful. 6 months ago, some of you laughed at my equipment. You judged me based on appearances, assuming that newer meant better, that loud meant strong. Today, I hope you've learned that real strength often comes in quiet packages. Lieutenant Castro raised her hand. Ma'am, my brother always said you were the best sniper he'd ever served with. But what you did with Colonel Harrington, standing up to corruption even when it was dangerous, that took a different kind of courage. Quote, Alexis nodded. Your brother's right. It's easy to take a shot when you know who the enemy is and where they're positioned. It's much harder to take a stand when the enemy wears the same uniform you do and hides behind rank and regulations. She paused, looking at each young face in turn. You're going to face situations in your careers where you'll have to choose between following orders and doing what's right. When that happens, remember this. Your oath is to the Constitution and to the people you serve, not to any individual officer or commander. Lieutenant Davis spoke up. How do you know when to take that risk? When to stand up to someone with more power than you? Alexis smiled, remembering her own journey from confused trauma victim to someone who'd found her voice again. You'll know, because staying silent will hurt more than speaking up. Because you'll realize that some things are worth fighting for, even if you might lose. And because you'll understand that real courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing what's right, despite the fear. As the trainees filed out of the range, Alexis began her end-of-day routine. She cleaned her pink Remington 700 with the same careful attention she'd given it for years. But now the ritual felt different. The rifle was no longer a burden or a reminder of trauma. It was simply a tool, one that had served her well but didn't define her. That evening, Alexis sat in her quarters, writing in the journal her therapist had recommended. She'd been documenting her recovery, her growth, and her evolving understanding of what it meant to serve with honor. Today marks 6 months since I stood up to Harrington, she wrote. I thought the confrontation was about saving my career or avoiding an unwanted assignment. But I realize now it was about something bigger, reclaiming my own voice and my own power to choose. For years after the ambush, I felt like a victim of circumstances beyond my control. The ambush, the trauma, the grief over losing Martinez, all of it made me feel powerless. I let that feeling drive me into hiding, into a quiet corner where I hoped no one would notice me. But Harrington's actions forced me to remember something I'd forgotten. I'm not a victim. I'm a survivor. And survivors don't just endure. They fight back when necessary. They protect others who can't protect themselves, and they refuse to let bullies win. Alexis set down her pen and looked at the photograph on her desk, not the hidden one from Syria, but a new picture showing her with her current students. They were all smiling, confident young officers who understood that strength came from character, not equipment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new students to train, and new opportunities to make a difference. Alexis had learned that the most important targets weren't always visible through a rifle scope. Sometimes they were systems that needed changing, people who needed protecting, and young minds that needed guidance. She'd spent 12 years as one of the military's most effective snipers, but Alexis was beginning to understand that her most important shot might not involve a rifle at all. It might be the shot she took at corruption, at abuse of power, at the assumption that rank made right. As she prepared for bed, Alexis felt something she hadn't experienced in years, genuine excitement about the future. Not because she knew what would happen, but because she finally understood that she had the power to shape whatever came next. The woman who had once been called Pink Death because of her ability to eliminate targets from impossible distances had learned that the most impossible shot of all was the one that required no weapon except the courage to stand up and speak truth to power. And, for the first time in 2 years, Alexis Morgan, instructor, survivor, and defender of what was right, was ready to take whatever shot came next. Alexis woke before dawn, her mind already clear and focused. Today would be different from yesterday, and not just because of the new ethics curriculum she'd been developing. Today was the first day of a special training program she'd proposed, one designed not just to teach marksmanship, but to cultivate the kind of leadership that could prevent another Harrington situation. As she walked toward the range in the pre-dawn light, Alexis spotted a familiar figure waiting by the equipment shed. Lieutenant Castro stood at attention, clearly having arrived early to prepare. "Lieutenant," Alexis nodded. "You're here before the birds." Castro smiled nervously. Wanted to get a head start, ma'am. The new trainees are arriving today, and I heard they're a tough bunch. Alexis raised an eyebrow. And you thought you'd what? Impress them with your early morning dedication? Actually, ma'am, I wanted to ask you something before everyone else arrived. Alexis unlocked the equipment shed and motioned Castro inside. The familiar smell of gun oil and metal greeted them as they entered the small space lined with weapon racks. What's on your mind, Lieutenant? Castro hesitated, then straightened her shoulders. Ma'am, I want to apologize. When I first came here, I was one of the loudest ones mocking your rifle. I was arrogant, disrespectful, and completely wrong. I judged you by appearances and I missed what was really important. Alexis paused in pulling equipment from the shelves. She hadn't expected this. That was 6 months ago, Lieutenant. Water under the bridge. Maybe for you, ma'am, but I need you to know something. What you taught us, about standing up to Harrington, about moral courage, it changed my whole understanding of what it means to be an officer. Castro's sincerity was unmistakable, and Alexis felt a sense of pride that had nothing to do with marksmanship scores or confirmed kills. The hardest lessons are usually the ones we remember, Lieutenant. Now help me set up the range. The new trainees will be here in an hour, and I want everything ready. As they worked side by side, Alexis considered how far Castro had come. 6 months ago, she'd been the embodiment of everything wrong with military leadership. Arrogant, dismissive, valuing flash over substance. Now she was becoming the kind of officer who understood that true authority came from character and example, not rank or equipment. By 0700, the range was ready, and the first of the new trainees began to arrive. This group was different. They'd been handpicked for Alexis's special program, a mix of experienced NCOs and promising young officers, all selected for their potential as future leaders. Alexis stood at the instructor's position, her pink rifle resting on the table beside her. She'd considered switching to a standard-issue weapon for this new program, but had decided against it. The pink rifle had become more than just a tool. It was a statement, a reminder that appearances could deceive, that substance mattered more than style. Welcome to Advanced Leadership and Marksmanship, Alexis began as the group assembled. I'm Lieutenant Morgan. Some of you may have heard stories about me, or about this weapon. She gestured to the pink rifle. Good. That saves time on introductions. A few nervous smiles flickered across the faces of the trainees. They'd all heard the stories. The legendary shot, the confrontation with Harrington, the ethics curriculum that was now being implemented across multiple bases. This program isn't just about hitting targets, although you'll certainly learn to do that. It's about understanding what it means to be a leader in situations where there are no clear answers, no regulation manuals to guide you, and where your decisions could mean life or death for the people under your command. Alexis picked up her rifle, checking it with practiced efficiency. Today, you'll each fire 20 rounds at varying distances. I'm not interested in your scores. I want to see how you approach the challenge, how you adapt to changing conditions, and, most importantly, how you handle failure. One of the NCOs, a weathered sergeant with combat ribbons on his chest, raised his hand. Ma'am, permission to ask a question? Go ahead, Sergeant. Why the pink rifle? With your skills, you could use any weapon in the arsenal. Alexis had been expecting this question, but not so early in the program. She considered her answer carefully. When I first joined the sniper program, I was the only woman in my class. My instructor handed me this rifle. Standard issue back then, nothing special about it. He said, "This is the only friend you'll need." The other trainees laughed. She ran her hand along the pink stock. After I graduated top of my class, I painted it pink as a reminder. Never judge by appearances, never underestimate anyone, and never let someone else's expectations define you. Every time someone laughs at this rifle, they're making the same mistake my classmates made years ago. The sergeant nodded, a new respect visible in his eyes. Thank you, ma'am. Now, before we begin firing, I want to introduce a concept that will be central to this program. Ethical decision-making under pressure. Lieutenant Castro will distribute the first scenario. You have 15 minutes to read it and formulate your response. As Castro handed out the folders, Alexis watched the trainees' faces. Some looked confused. They'd clearly expected a straightforward marksmanship class. Others seemed intrigued by the unexpected approach. The scenario was one Alexis had crafted carefully, based on her own experiences in Syria, a situation where following orders would accomplish the mission but potentially harm civilians, while disobeying orders would protect civilians but compromise the mission. There was no clear right answer, only difficult choices with significant consequences either way. As the trainees read, Alexis reflected on her own journey. 6 months ago, she'd been hiding from her past, avoiding responsibility, trying to disappear into the anonymous role of a basic instructor. Now she was using her experiences, both the traumatic and the triumphant, to shape the next generation of leaders. "Time's up," she announced. "Before you share your decisions, I want you to understand something important. There is no single correct answer to this scenario. What matters is your reasoning, your awareness of the ethical dimensions, and your willingness to accept responsibility for the consequences of your choice." One by one, the trainees presented their decisions. Some chose to follow orders, others to disobey. Some found creative third options that Alexis herself hadn't considered. What impressed her most wasn't the specific choices they made, but the thoughtfulness with which they approached the dilemma. After the last trainee finished, Alexis nodded to Castro, who distributed the rifles for the marksmanship portion of the day's training. "Now we shoot," Alexis said. "And as you do, I want you to remember this. Every time you pull a trigger, you're making a decision that can't be undone. The same is true of the orders you give, the reports you file, and the stands you take or fail to take. In that moment of decision, your character matters more than your rank, your equipment, or your orders." As the trainees moved to their positions, Alexis picked up her pink rifle and took her place alongside them. She wasn't just an instructor anymore. She was a fellow shooter, a comrade demonstrating by example rather than commanding from a position of authority. When she squeezed the trigger, hitting the center of the target with practiced precision, she felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with the shot itself. The circle was closing. From the mocked lieutenant with the pink rifle to the respected instructor shaping future leaders, from the traumatized survivor hiding from her past to the confident woman embracing her experiences, both painful and powerful. The shot that had started it all, the impossible hit that silenced the mockery, had led her here, to a place where her greatest contribution wasn't her accuracy with a rifle but her courage in standing up for what was right. As the sun climbed higher over Evergreen Combat Academy, Alexis Morgan watched her trainees finding their rhythm, adjusting to the wind, focusing on their breathing. Some hit their targets, others missed. But all of them were learning what she had learned through years of difficult experience, that the most important target wasn't downrange. It was the kind of person you became when faced with difficult choices. And that was a lesson worth teaching, one perfect shot at a time. 1 year after the Harrington incident, Alexis stood at the podium in the Pentagon's main briefing room, facing a sea of military brass and civilian officials. Her pink rifle, now something of a legend throughout the armed forces, rested in a custom display case behind her, a visual reminder of the journey that had brought her here. "Leadership isn't about rank or authority," she said, her voice steady and clear. "It's about making difficult choices when there are no easy answers, standing up for what's right even when it costs you personally, and recognizing that your most important duty is to the people under your command, not to your career advancement." The faces looking back at her represented every branch of the military: generals, admirals, command sergeants major, and fresh-faced lieutenants, all gathered for the official launch of the Military Ethics and Leadership Initiative, a program that had grown from Alexis's original curriculum at Evergreen Combat. "The Harrington case wasn't an isolated incident," Alexis continued. "It was a symptom of a culture that sometimes values obedience over integrity, results over process, and appearances over substance. Today, we begin the work of changing that culture, one leader at a time." As she finished her presentation and stepped away from the podium, the room erupted in applause. General Marcus Winters, the Joint Chiefs representative who had championed her program, approached with an extended hand. "Lieutenant Morgan, that was exceptional. I think you've made more of an impact with words today than most officers make with a lifetime of orders." Alexis shook his hand, still somewhat uncomfortable with the attention. "Thank you, sir. But the real test will be implementation across the forces. Words are easy. Changing institutional culture is the hard part." Winters nodded, his expression serious, "Which is why we need you heading this initiative full-time. Have you considered our offer?" The offer was a promotion to captain and assignment as the director of the new ethics program, a position that would take her away from teaching at Evergreen, but would allow her to implement the curriculum across all military branches. It was the kind of opportunity most officers would kill for: significant influence, rapid advancement, high visibility. I'm still thinking about it, sir. There's something about working directly with the trainees that I'm not sure I want to give up. Winters studied her face. Sometimes our greatest impact comes from places we don't expect, Morgan. You've proven you can change lives one-on-one at the range. The question is whether you're ready to change the entire system. Before Alexis could respond, a young lieutenant approached, looking nervous but determined. Lieutenant Morgan? I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to thank you personally. My sister served under you at Evergreen last year, Lieutenant Davis? She says your program saved her life in Afghanistan 3 months ago. Alexis remembered Davis well. Quiet, observant, one of the first trainees to recognize her after the famous shot. Saved her life how? Her commanding officer ordered her team into a village that intelligence said was cleared of civilians. But she noticed discrepancies in the reports that reminded her of one of your training scenarios. She refused the order and requested verification. Turned out the village was full of civilians who would have been caught in the crossfire. The lieutenant's eyes were bright with emotion. Her CO was furious, threatened her with insubordination, but she stood her ground, just like you taught her. The follow-up intelligence confirmed she was right. The original reports had been rushed and were fatally flawed. Alexis felt something tighten in her chest. Not the familiar constriction of anxiety or trauma, but an expanding warmth of pride and purpose. Is she okay? Her career? Better than okay. After the incident, 3 other officers came forward with similar concerns about rushed operations. There's an ongoing investigation now. And my sister? She's being recommended for a commendation. As the lieutenant walked away, General Winters raised an eyebrow. Still thinking about that offer, Morgan? Alexis looked around the room, at the senior officers now engaging in animated discussions about her presentation, at the case containing her pink rifle, a symbol that had transformed from an object of mockery to a reminder of moral courage. I'll have my answer for you by tomorrow, sir. That evening, Alexis sat alone in her hotel room, the lights of Washington, D.C. twinkling outside her window. She'd spread her journal open on the desk, reviewing entries from the past year, her journey from the confrontation with Harrington to this moment of decision. Her phone buzzed with a message from Lieutenant Castro. Just heard about the Pentagon presentation. The whole base is talking about it. Whatever you decide, we've got your back. Alexis smiled. Castro had transformed from one of her biggest critics to one of her strongest allies, eventually becoming her assistant instructor at Evergreen. The young woman who had once mocked her pink rifle now wore a small pink ribbon on her uniform, a symbol adopted by graduates of Alexis's program, a quiet statement about the kind of leadership they aspired to embody. Another message appeared, this one from Major Chen, now the commanding officer at Evergreen. Trainees asked about you today. Told them you were changing the world. Don't prove me wrong. The weight of the decision pressed on her. Stay at Evergreen, working directly with trainees, seeing the immediate impact of her teaching, or step into this larger role, with the potential to reshape leadership culture across the entire military. Alexis closed her journal and walked to the window, looking out at the monuments and government buildings that represented the nation she'd served for 13 years. The Washington Monument stood illuminated against the night sky, a reminder of leadership that transcended any single moment or decision. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass, not the broken, traumatized woman who had hidden behind the role of basic instructor, nor the legendary Pink Death sniper from Syria, but someone new, someone who had integrated both those aspects of herself into a whole person, capable of both remarkable precision and profound compassion. The next morning, Alexis entered General Winters' office with her decision made. He looked up from his desk, setting aside the report he'd been reading. Captain Morgan, he said, emphasizing the rank. I'm assuming since you're here you've made your decision. I have, sir. Alexis placed a folder on his desk. This is my proposal for how the Ethics and Leadership Initiative should be structured. You'll notice a few modifications to the original plan. Winters opened the folder, scanning the first page. His eyebrows rose. You want to split your time, 6 months at the Pentagon developing policy and curriculum, 6 months in the field implementing and teaching? Yes, sir. The program needs both the institutional authority to change policy and the ground-level credibility that comes from direct engagement. One without the other won't work. And the mobile training team concept? Instead of bringing all instructors to Washington for training, we bring the training to them, to every major base, both domestic and overseas. The team would include myself, ethics specialists, and most importantly, officers who have faced real ethical dilemmas in the field and made difficult choices. Winters leaned back in his chair, considering. It's unorthodox, more expensive than our original proposal, more logistically complex, and more effective, Alexis said firmly. Ethics can't be taught effectively from a distance, sir. It has to be personal, immediate, and connected to real experience. The general was quiet for a long moment, tapping his fingers on the folder. Then he smiled. You know what impressed me most about your record, Morgan? Not the marksmanship scores, not the combat decorations, not even your handling of the Harrington situation. It was what you did afterward. Sir? You could have leveraged that victory into any assignment you wanted. Special operations, advanced training, a staff position at Central Command. Instead, you went back to teaching basic trainees, the same people who had mocked you. That told me everything I needed to know about your character. He closed the folder and stood up. Proposal approved, Captain. We'll announce the structure this afternoon. I assume you'll want to return to Evergreen to wrap up your current training cycle before officially starting. Yes, sir. Thank you. As Alexis left the Pentagon, she felt a sense of alignment she hadn't experienced since before the ambush in Syria. The path ahead wasn't easy. Changing entrenched military culture never was. But for the first time, she wasn't fighting against the system or hiding from it. She was working to transform it from within, using the very skills that had once made her a weapon to now make her an agent of positive change. 2 days later, Alexis returned to Evergreen Combat Academy. The familiar smell of gunpowder and dust greeted her as she walked toward the range where her current class was in their final week of training. Major Chen met her halfway, falling into step beside her. So, Captain Morgan, he said with a slight smile, should we start calling you ma'am now instead of Alexis? She rolled her eyes. Only if you want me to start calling you sir instead of Mark. Fair enough. The trainees are excited to see you. Word about your new position spread fast. Of course it did. Nothing travels faster than military gossip. As they approached the range, Alexis could see her class engaged in the final qualification exercise, a series of shots at varying distances under changing conditions. Lieutenant Castro was supervising, moving between shooters and offering guidance where needed. They've improved, Alexis observed. Castro's done good work while I was gone. She had an excellent teacher, Chen replied. What's next for her with you leaving? I'm taking her with me, if she wants to go. She's on the short list for the mobile training team. Castro spotted them and called the trainees to attention. 24 men and women immediately stood, turning to face Alexis and Chen. As you were, Alexis called, finish your qualification. I'll speak with you after. For the next hour, she watched them work, noting the improvements since she'd left, identifying areas where they still needed development. But what impressed her most wasn't their technical proficiency. It was the way they supported each other, offered suggestions, celebrated successes, and analyzed failures without blame or shame. They had become more than individual marksmen. They had become a community of practice, committed to each other's growth and development. That, more than any single skill, would serve them well in the challenges ahead. When the last shooter had completed the qualification course, Castro gathered the class near the instructor's station. Alexis stepped forward, her pink rifle, which she'd retrieved from the Pentagon display for this occasion, held casually in her hands. Congratulations on completing the Advanced Leadership and Marksmanship program, she began. Your qualification scores tell me you've mastered the technical aspects of precision shooting. But as you've learned over the past months, this program is about much more than hitting targets. She looked at each face, remembering their journeys from that first day, the struggles, breakthroughs, moments of doubt and triumph. Each of you came here with different experiences, different strengths, different reasons for wanting to become better marksmen, but you're leaving with something in common, in understanding that how you lead is as important as how you shoot, that moral courage sometimes matters more than physical courage, and that standing up for what's right may be the most difficult and important shot you'll ever take. Alexis placed her rifle on the table beside her. I've been offered a new position, developing and implementing an ethics and leadership program across all military branches. I've accepted, which means this will be my last class at Evergreen. A murmur ran through the trainees. Castro's expression was carefully neutral, but Alexis could see the question in her eyes. Before I go, I want to share something with you that I've never told any previous class. Alexis took a deep breath. This wasn't part of the standard graduation speech, but these trainees had earned her honesty. After the ambush in Syria, I was diagnosed with severe PTSD. The doctors said I might never return to active duty. The nightmares, the flashbacks, the constant hypervigilance, they were destroying me from the inside out. I requested transfer to Evergreen, not because I wanted to teach, but because I was running away from everything that reminded me of that day. The range was completely silent now, every face focused intently on hers. Teaching was supposed to be my hiding place. Instead, it became my healing ground. Working with trainees like you, watching you struggle, grow, overcome your limitations, reminded me why I joined the military in the first place. Not to be the best shot or to earn decorations, but to serve something larger than myself. Alexis picked up her rifle again, running her hand along the pink stock. When Colonel Harrington tried to force me back into operations before I was ready, she thought she was using my skills. What she didn't understand was that skills without purpose are just techniques. Purpose without ethics is just ambition. What gives meaning to our service isn't the targets we hit, but the values we uphold while hitting them. She smiled, looking at the class one last time. Remember that when you return to your units. Remember it when you're given orders that don't feel right. Remember it when you're tempted to take shortcuts or look the other way. And remember that sometimes the most powerful statement you can make isn't with your rifle but with your voice and your example. After the formal graduation ceremony, Alexis found Castro waiting by the equipment shed, methodically cleaning and storing the training rifles. "So," Castro said without looking up, "when were you going to tell me about the new position?" "I'm telling you now," Alexis replied. "And I'm also telling you that I want you on my mobile training team, if you're interested." Castro's hand stilled. "Me? Why?" "Because you embody everything this program stands for. You started as someone who judged by appearances and valued flash over substance. You've become someone who understands that real leadership is about character, not rank or equipment. I had a good teacher. You had a teacher who recognized your potential. The growth was all yours." Alexis leaned against the doorframe. "The team will travel to bases worldwide, implementing the ethics curriculum, working with commanders and trainees alike. It won't be easy. We'll face resistance, skepticism, institutional inertia." Castro finally looked up, a slow smile spreading across her face. "So basically, we'll be taking on the entire military establishment, armed with nothing but ethics manuals and moral courage?" "Something like that." "When do we start?" 6 months later, Alexis stood on a range halfway around the world, watching a group of Special Forces operators work through one of her ethical scenario exercises. The desert sun beat down mercilessly, turning the training area into an oven by mid-morning. But the operators, some of the most elite soldiers in the military, remained focused and engaged. Castro moved among them, facilitating small group discussions about the scenario Alexis had presented, a situation based on her own experience in Syria, where following orders would complete the mission but potentially harm innocent people, while refusing orders would protect innocents but compromise operational security. "Time's up," Alexis called. "Each team, present your decision and reasoning." As the teams reported out, Alexis was struck by the thoughtfulness of their responses, the sophistication of their ethical reasoning, and their willingness to challenge conventional wisdom. These weren't mindless order followers or reckless cowboys. They were professionals wrestling sincerely with complex moral questions that had no easy answers. After the last team finished, a grizzled master sergeant raised his hand. "Ma'am, permission to ask a question?" "Go ahead, Sergeant." "Most of us have been in situations like the one you described. Some of us made the right call, some didn't. But the hardest part isn't making the decision in the moment. It's living with it afterward. How do you teach that?" The question hung in the air, honest and challenging. Alexis looked at the faces watching her. Men and women who had seen combat, made life-or-death decisions, carried the weight of those choices long after they returned home. "You're right, Sergeant. We can train for ethical decision-making, but living with the consequences, That's the real test. Alexis gestured to her pink rifle, which now accompanied her to every training session as a symbol and teaching tool. After Syria, I couldn't look at this weapon without seeing the faces of people I'd killed and the teammates I couldn't save. The nightmares, the guilt, the second-guessing, they nearly destroyed me. She moved closer to the group, her voice dropping slightly so they had to lean in to hear. What saved me wasn't forgetting or compartmentalizing. It was finding purpose in the pain, using my experience to help others avoid the same mistakes, the same trauma. That's not a solution that works for everyone, but what I've learned is that meaning is the antidote to suffering. If we can find meaning in our hardest moments, we can survive them. The sergeant nodded slowly. That's worth more than all the scenarios and role plays. Thank you, ma'am. That evening, as the sun set over the desert base, Alexis sat outside her temporary quarters, cleaning her rifle with the same methodical care she'd always given it. Castro joined her, 2 cups of coffee in hand. That was a good session today, Castro said, handing Alexis a cup. They started skeptical, but by the end I think we had them. One group at a time, Alexis agreed. That's how change happens. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the colors shift in the desert sky. Then Castro spoke again, her voice thoughtful. When I first met you, I thought the pink rifle was a gimmick, something to make you stand out, to be different for the sake of being different. I didn't understand what it really meant. And now I see it's not about the color at all. It's about having the courage to be who you are, to stand by your principles even when it would be easier to blend in. It's about making a statement that some things matter more than conformity or advancement or being liked. Alexis smiled. Not bad for a piece of painted wood and metal. The woman behind it isn't bad either, Castro said with a grin. Even if she is unnecessarily secretive about her plans. What are you talking about? The rumor mill says you've been offered command of Evergreen Combat Academy when you finish this deployment. Care to confirm or deny? Alexis shook her head, amused. Military gossip truly is faster than light. Yes, it's true. General Winters wants me to take over as commander and completely redesign the training program, integrating ethics and leadership throughout. And I'm considering it. Quote, Alexis looked out at the darkening horizon. When I first came to Evergreen, I was running away from who I was, from what I'd done, from the responsibility I carried. If I go back as commander, it would be the opposite. Embracing who I've become, using everything I've learned, building something new. Castro was quiet for a moment, then asked the question Alexis had been asking herself. Are you ready for that kind of responsibility? I don't know, but I'm not afraid of it anymore, and that's progress. As night fell over the desert base, Alexis Morgan, captain, instructor, survivor, considered the journey that had brought her here. From the traumatized lieutenant hiding from her past, to the confident officer reshaping military culture. From the woman mocked for her pink rifle, to the leader whose courage had inspired a movement. The path hadn't been easy or straight. It had been marked by confrontation, resistance, setbacks, and unexpected allies. But throughout it all, she had remained true to the principle that had guided her from the beginning. That how you lead matters as much as how you shoot. That moral courage is as important as physical courage. And that sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is simply refusing to be silenced. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new trainees, new opportunities to make a difference. But tonight, under a desert sky filled with stars, Alexis Morgan was at peace with herself and her choices, a peace that had come not from forgetting her past, but from transforming it into purpose. And that, she reflected as she finished cleaning her pink rifle, was the most important shot she had ever taken. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.